Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Rob Levine, and welcome to this edition of Tableau Tuesday. Today we'll be talking about Tableau Mobile. Before we get started, just from a logistics standpoint, if you have any questions, we'd ask that you please post them to the Q&A panel, not the chat window, but the Q&A panel. If you don't see the Q&A panel, you can go into the bottom of the WebEx window where all the icons are, and you can hit the ellipses, and then you should see it there. And we'll be reviewing those towards the end of the presentation here. All right, so like I said, my name is Rob Levine. I'm a sales consultant. I'm actually based in Denver and cover the Southwest territory. With me on the panel today is my manager, Steve Martinez. He'll be covering most of the questions as they come up. And I figured that we'd start today. Obviously, it's the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing. And so I thought we'd start with kind of a space theme. And this is actually the SpaceX Dragon capsule. And as you see, we've got four main screens that look kind of like the screens that you'd see in the Tesla. And it's got all sorts of analytical features, trend lines, bar charts, KPIs. And these are really just different control systems around navigation, propulsion, life support, guidance, communication, that type of thing. And this is the Soyuz cockpit. I think this was flown in October of 2008. And obviously it looks a little bit different, but they both have kind of the same natural layout in terms of key information that's being presented in a finite amount of space. Obviously the technology is updated in the SpaceX versus the Soyuz here, but really the question becomes, why are we talking about spacecraft when it comes to a topic like mobile? Well, the fact of the matter is that cockpit design in spacecraft is not unlike that of mobile dashboard design. You're dealing with finite limitations around power and space. You go offline frequently. You're constantly on the go, and it's essential to communicate quickly and succinctly with the important stats that you need at the time you need them, but also allow for that drill down when it's necessary, that progressive disclosure, if you will. Bandwidth is also pretty variable. And like I mentioned, there are certainly power constraints behind that as well. And ultimately, the reason why I'm pulling this theme in is because this is a good mindset to have when designing for mobile use. They both use dashboards, and fortunately with Device Designer, it's not as consequential for any sort of error or mistake. But here's what we're going to cover today. So I'll walk you through the Tableau mobile app, and then we'll also focus a lot on what we call Device Designer. This is kind of the key building block for mobile content. It's actually a component of Tableau Desktop. We'll spend a good amount of time there talking about how it works, and then we'll end on some of the design best practices for mobile devices. So let's start with what is Device Designer. It's a feature that we introduced back in, I think it was 10.0, so it's a number of years old at this point. We've enhanced it with every subsequent release since then. But it lets you author dashboards in Tableau that look and behave differently based on the space that's available on the particular device, and more specifically within the embedded area that you have within, even it could be a web page or even just a desktop application. But the concept here is that it's a single dashboard with adaptations for a variety of different screen sizes. Right? So you're not designing multiple independent dashboards. You're actually designing multiple layouts or multiple skins, if you will, for that one dashboard. And like I said, it's actually just a component of Tableau Desktop, which you'll see momentarily. So the question becomes, why do we create it? Well, really, mobile is just too important to relegate to execs with a fancy tablet, right? Everyone's got a phone. Everyone needs access to data wherever they are, and so it's just at this point it's almost a prerequisite. And prior to this type of capability, customers were constantly publishing separate or independent dashboards for different touch points, right? So you have one key dashboard that everyone needs to look at, and we would find that customers would create 3 different instances of that dashboard, one for phone, one for tablet, and one for desktop or web. Well, of course, the challenge there is that if something needs to change in terms of the structure of that dashboard, you have to change that in all three places. If you change the table structure that it's going to be pulling from, or the database, or even just update the security, that's three places, and that's kind of a maintenance nightmare. And so this way, we consolidate that down to just the one. And then the other key piece was to incorporate something called responsive web design. And so let me show you an example of what that is. So here I've got a, excuse me, I've got a just a normal web page. Let me maximize this so it takes up most of the screen here. And notice the layout. Keep your eye on the layout as we start to shrink this down quite a bit. Right. So far, nothing's really happening other than the fact that maybe the labels are getting cut off. You can start to see that here where the labels are getting the ellipses. But as we get further and further in, we're going to start to see something. And you might have just seen it. So there are two things that jumped out at me. Number one is this side panel completely disappeared. And the second thing, the row of 6 KPIs actually went down to 2 rows of 3. And the reason for that is because we hit something called a breakpoint. And if we continue this further, we'll hit another breakpoint. And what that'll render is you see how the social networks bar charts now got moved to underneath the area chart. Again, so if I undo that, it was on the side. And by the way, you can see this on a variety of websites, even the Tableau website as well. You'll notice that as we shrink this down, the order of the 2 links and the image of the laptop, that gets reversed. Right? So the idea is that we're with responsive design, we're incorporating the amount of embeddable space that is detected from the user touch point. And so it's a way to build that experience into the web page itself, or into the page of the application, and it minimizes the zooming, the panning, the scrolling, and provides that easy navigation. And so this was just one of several examples, but we wanted to incorporate that into the flow and reflect the ease of use and the easiness that people love about Tableau. So let's actually get into a quick demo here. All right, excuse me. So here I've just got kind of an example dashboard. We've got our profitability, our monthly sales by segment and product category, with some filters on the right-hand side, KPIs at the top that you see, and then the map kind of in the middle. And as we're all aware, obviously there's a lot of information on here, a lot of interactivity, and if the goal is to try and consolidate this down into an iPhone or an Android phone device, that may be a little bit of a challenge, right? There's a lot of information to pack into a small amount of real estate, even when you incorporate the mouse over tooltip. But that's really our goal. So we're going to use, like I mentioned, the device designer. And if you hit the device preview, what you'll see is that a couple things happen. Number one, we have a toolbar at the top here that allows us to choose which device we want, or device type, I should say, we want to create a layout for. Specific models, in case we wanted to get that detailed, the orientation button, and then of course the inclusion or exclusion of the Tableau Mobile app. Now what I'm going to do is start with just the phone layout. And by the way, what you'll see is there's kind of that dark border around to reflect the amount of screen real estate we have to work with. So it's going to try and consolidate all that into that effectively. Now obviously there's a lot, so it packed it in there, and we don't even see the time trends. But as I add the phone layout, you'll see that it's listed there on the left-hand side under the default one. And what is a fairly new thing is it's actually tried to take its best guess at what the layout should be, meaning we're going to put the KPIs at the top, then the filters, then the viz, then the legends, and then so forth. And of course, there is a little bit of an overhang there because we know that on a phone it's common to scroll, so it's going to allow that scrolling capability. Now, obviously, it has not guessed perfectly, which it is not. It's certainly not designed to do. But I'm going to edit this layout myself just to make those changes. So first, I might let's shrink down the KPIs, and we obviously need to create room for those two area charts. So what I'd like to do is increase the height, so that way we have a lot more room down at the bottom. And I'll just give those two visualizations some room here. Maybe I'll increase that one just a little bit. And by the way, seeing that the very bottom portion of the initial landing is going to be the legend, it probably doesn't lend the user to the idea that they can scroll even further to get to these two area charts. So I'm going to remove the legend, and now at least there's kind of a pull tab, if you will, that'll show up to kind of indicate to the user that there's a little bit more to consume. And at this point, we really don't need the region filter since we have the individual states. So I'll just remove that from the dashboard. And at this point, I'm just going to publish this up, right? So we still have the initial dashboard. We have the default layout. We now have a layout specifically for the phone, and we can continue to add ones for the desktop and the tablet. But for our purposes right now, we'll just go with what we've got here. So I'm going to say publish this to server. And we'll put this in our demo, and we'll call this our Tableau Tuesday mobile workbook or mobile dashboard. And we'll say publish. So now, of course, if you're familiar with the publishing process, this will actually launch a new instance of the browser on my laptop here. And then we'll actually pull this up in the mobile device as well. All right, so let me expand that out. And while we're doing that, let me come in to bring over my mobile device here. Looks like I got timed out, so bear with me. There we go. All right, so let me pull these up side by side. We've got our web page on our laptop, and then we have our my phone being mirrored here. So let me find the Tableau Tuesday dashboard. So I'll just do Explore, and I'll go in. And by the way, it actually is going to show up in my recent, so I'll just click on that right here. I'll try to navigate as effectively as I can, since you won't be able to track my finger movements on my phone here. But let me hit that overview, and that should render with the layout that we just created, which you see here. So I've got the scrolling capability, I've got the filtering, and by the way, when you hit the filter, again, this is optimized for touch, so you see how it pops out a little bit more, so you don't have to be as precise with your finger movements. And then we even have the tooltip there, which is certainly a nice capability. But of course, obviously, if we were to load that on the browser view, we would get the default layout that we started with. So that's really it. Again, it's one dashboard that allows you to tailor the experience per device type, and that's kind of the goal, to just really allow for that different skin or that different look and feel based on the user's touch point. So let's get into how it works. Okay. There are really 5 things that you should know, and the first one is that if you're not really concerned with mobile devices, then nothing changes, right? You're going to create your dashboard, you're going to publish it up. That flow is still the same. That's not going to change at all. And again, the benefit here for the second point is that it is one single dashboard. Again, we're not creating multiple iterations of dashboards. We're not having to manage 3 separate objects. You create one dashboard. And there is that default dashboard, which is, as we'll talk about momentarily, it's going to be kind of a staging area for all the content, and it's going to drive a lot of the function behind the subsequent layouts. So everything starts with that. And as we saw, there are individual layouts per device type, right? So if you think about it from a point of an analogy here, let's say we've got our single dashboard. Well, think of this as the parent and your different device layouts as individual children, right? So if you have children, you obviously understand that there's some variation in terms of how they look and how they function, how they operate from one to another. But they all essentially get their DNA from their parent, even though they may have different sizes, shapes, and behavior patterns. But so the parent is really where everything is defined and then reflected independently within each of the children. And so this corresponds into the different device layouts. All right, so we've got our desktop, we've got our tablet, and we have our phone. And it's going to inherit everything from the default dashboard, but still allow for some customization or for some uniqueness to show through. So let's talk a little bit about the workflow now that we have the basic structure and understanding. And by the way, keeping with the space theme, this is actually the Lunar Orbit and Landing Approach Simulator that was built back in 1961. It was that the goal was to actually start to get astronauts used to the idea of landing on the moon. And the funny thing is, you can see that the yoke and the joystick there is present when obviously there are no runways on the moon, so this had a very short shelf life. But when it comes to the workflow of how we create mobile layouts, just like we saw, we start with the default dashboard. And again, this is really nothing more than just publishing up your dashboard, or actually creating your dashboard, I should say. And then as soon as you enter the device designer, you would just apply that default dashboard. And then our recommendation is to pivot over to create the phone layout. And the reason for this is because out of the 3, the desktop layout, the tablet layout, and the phone layout, this is going to be the one that's the most different. So this will pretty much establish the other end of the spectrum in terms of what that look and feel is going to be. So basically, pivot to this one because it's going to be the hardest, right? It's obviously the most constraining in terms of the real estate, which is going to be the primary factor. And then from that, you can create the tablet and the desktop layouts. And what we've seen is usually with the tablet and the desktop, there's usually very little modification or customization that needs to happen. 9 times out of 10, they can pretty much piggyback on top of the default dashboard structure. And so let's talk a little bit about what the default dashboard does. First off, it controls the content, which means that if you were to remove an individual sheet from the default dashboard, it would actually remove that from all of the layouts as well. So for something to exist in a phone layout or a tablet layout or a desktop layout, it has to exist in the default dashboard layout. The second thing is it actually controls the formatting, right? So if you think about the process flow, if you were to update an individual sheet somewhere, those changes would reflect in a dashboard. Well, you carry that further downstream, whatever changes or whatever content is present within the default dashboard would carry through to the subsequent layouts in the phone, the tablet, and the desktop. So again, if you change the formatting higher up, it'll show within those 3 layouts as well. The next thing is that it'll actually control the sizing, right? So if you were to set up set the sizing to be on a worksheet for the entire view, that would also carry through. And then it's also going to define actions, right? So any actions that exist from navigating from one sheet to another, or externally to maybe perhaps another web page, or even in the form of just a use as filter, right? So if you click on a bar, it'll and have it filter down to another viz within the worksheet. Those actions will also carry through from the default dashboard to the others. So right now, what we've seen so far is there's not a lot of opportunity for the individual layouts to be expressed individually, I should say. As the default dashboard controls the worksheets that appear in the layouts, it controls the formatting, the initial sizing, and then of course the actions. And like I mentioned, I'll mention it a couple more times, is you always want to create the default dashboard first. So right now this kind of seems like in the parent-child relationship that this is more of the over-controlling, overbearing helicopter parent, if you will. But as we all know, within within normal day-to-day operations, that's never the case, right? So there is the opportunity to customize a little bit and allow each layout to be somewhat unique. And a couple of examples of that would be, let's say we actually did not have a tablet layout. We only had the desktop and the phone. Well, what would happen? Well, at that point, the helicopter parenting would continue, and the default dashboard would essentially take its place and supply that responsibility. And so that's a good reason why you'd ultimately want to create all three layouts, because you're never quite sure what all the touch points are going to be for your end users, for your audience. They may come on various models of different devices, and so it's hard to anticipate all that. In this way, you can actually specifically determine what they receive in terms of the content layout. And therefore, if you do create all three layouts, then what happens is the default dashboard really acts as nothing more than a staging area for all the content, right? Theoretically, it's never going to be seen, but it's more of a container for all the information that you'd want to include in either the desktop, the tablet, or the phone layouts, even if they are different from one to another. So that's another good reason why you'd want to use all three. And so this way, Tableau Server or Tableau Online only serves up the individual layouts that are needed. And so, by the way, with this, the way you can kind of get into the customization is just like we saw in the demo, right? So once you create the individual layouts, you would go in and override and say, I actually want to update the settings so that I get to customize it as I see fit. And what that customization is going to allow you to do is really, for lack of a better term, it's going to kind of sever the relationship to a certain degree between, in this case, the phone layout and the default dashboard. Now, that relationship still does exist, so at this point it's probably more of like an unruly teenager where the parent still has a role, it still has responsibility, but the phone layout is starting to be a little bit more tailored and independent. And a couple of examples of what that might include are removing elements or removing individual sheets from the layout. That could also include resizing or shifting things around or rearranging them within the layout. It would include incorporating or adding in new dashboard objects, in this case in the form of a text box or an image or layout containers. And then also, and I'd say probably most importantly, getting into including quick filters from the vizzes. And I'd say even more importantly than that, changing the layout of those. The reason why that's so critical is because obviously the amount of real estate that you have to work with on a desktop is significantly different than what you have on a phone. And if you had a filter, let's call it a checkbox list that shows 50 different elements, well, that takes up maybe 20% of the screen on a desktop, but that would essentially take up about probably 80 to 90% of space on a phone, right? So changing that format is going to be vastly vastly critical so that the users don't have to navigate through that and compete with that in terms of the analysis. And the customization is also going to allow you to adjust the width or create that scrolling capability, because again, that's a usability piece where scrolling on a desktop dashboard is, I'd say it's taboo, right? You want to provide that concise single view where everything shows up on the screen and nothing more is needed. But on a phone, scrolling is inherent, right? Most people are used to the idea of using the phone to scroll to a page 2 or a page 3, if you will. So you actually want to take advantage of that benefit. And so the customizations allow you to, again, remove or re-add worksheets, change the sizing behavior and the positions as well. And then, of course, you can add in and reformat those layout containers, other dashboard objects as well. And then you have control over the quick filters, the parameters, and the legends, and that type of thing. And by the way, one of the things that we've done, I think it was in 2018.2, is we added in something called automatic mobile layouts. And we saw an example of this in the demo, where as soon as you create the phone layout, desktop will automatically create that custom phone layout with the content, the filters, and the legends arranged in that optimal vertical arrangement. And as I mentioned before, it's not perfect, but it can be a huge time saver, and it's a great starting point to creating the phone layout, which is usually the most challenging. And the logic behind it, or really the algorithm, I should say, is that it's going to take the filters and place them above the visualizations, and then the legends below the visualizations. And this way it gives the user kind of that natural feel of, in this small amount of real estate, I'm going to select the elements of the data that I care about, and then it'll be reflected in the viz where I do my analysis, and then use the legends below as a reference point. And it will do that in sequential order for all of the visualizations there. Now again, it's not a silver bullet, but it is a great starting point, so you don't have to create that, create it step for step for step. And so again, with the automatic mobile layouts, with one click you create that vertical layout with the optimized placement. We actually don't do it for the tablet layout or the desktop, again, simply because they're usually going to be the most similar to the default dashboard. But it does automatically resize that to the screen. And from there you can tweak it as needed. And so ultimately, again, the default dashboard, I should say, still controls the content, the formatting, and the actions. Right? It's defining the structure, really the identity of what the dashboard is. Right? This dashboard design feature is not designed to create something radically different for your phone versus your tablet versus your desktop. It's designed to preserve the identity across all those form factors. Now, that brings us to the fifth thing that you should be aware of, and that is that you're not designing for a specific device. And I'd say this is a common situation that we see customers getting into, and the reason that you're not designing for, or you shouldn't be designing for a specific device, is because of this. So this is an image from OpenSignal, and they were tracking all the different device types that were hitting their website. And so this is about 3 or 4 years ago, but this tree map shows all the different Android device types that were accessing their site. And I'll spare you the details. It was over 11,868 unique device models of Android that were accessing their site. What they've reported now is it's closer to 45,000. And so what I'd say is, think about the number of people that are on this call. We've got about 120 or so, and how many of us have actually upgraded their phone in the last year, right? Yeah, maybe 20%. How many have upgraded their phone in the last 2 years? Probably closer to 60 to 70. And we can go on and on and on, but the idea here is that with each upgrade, I know with my own personal situation, the screen size has been different. It's gotten larger. The screen is rarely going to be the exact same from one instance to another, and so if you're trying to design to a specific device, you're going to be trying to hit a moving target. And that's just for one person. Imagine an audience of 100 who all have various types of phones. And by the way, that picture on the right, that's just it's a little bit older, but it shows the different models of Samsung devices, both phones and tablets, and in between, and what their screen sizes are. So the key takeaway here is that really what you should be designing for is not a specific device, but more importantly, the amount of space you have to work with. And that's what we refer to as embeddable space. And so if you were to look at a phone, there are really four things on there. And again, that's going to be the case whether it's a portrait or landscape, but you have your navigation at the bottom that is device specific. You have your toolbar at the top that shows power, time, cell phone signal and all that, and any other notifications at the top. And again, that's also device specific. And then within the Tableau Mobile piece, you actually have the Viz toolbar. I'll pull that up again once we get back into the mobile device. And then so what you're left with at that point is the embeddable space, and that's reflected in this dashboard here. And like I mentioned, that'll be the case whether we're dealing with portrait or landscape. But what we're going to do is, and also I should point out that the embeddable space is not just reflected on mobile devices, but it could also be the case within a web page. So if you're actually trying to embed in a web page and you have a small amount of real estate, that may be another example where you might not want the desktop layout. That may be something where you want the phone layout and provide that responsive design. So really what Tableau is going to do is it's going to examine the height and the width of the amount of space that it has to work with. So it'll take that information from the device itself, and it's going to take the smallest amount or the smaller amount of those two measures and use that for the pixel size. And based on that number, it's going to classify it as either a desktop, a tablet, or a phone. So it's going to say, look, if I have over 800 pixels in either the height or the width, then we're going to assume that you're a desktop. If it's got less than 500 in the height or the width, we're going to assume you're a phone. And if it's in between, it's going to assume that it's a tablet. Right? So that's it. That's the logic that it's going to use. Now, obviously what that means is in the spectrum of end user touch points, you can just walk the halls of various organizations and you see people with very large laptops, you see or very large monitors, you see people with small laptops. There could be some overlap where something is by a user classified as a phone or classified as a tablet, but maybe Tableau picks up on it as a phone. So there is going to be some kind of guessing again based off of that. There's going to be situations where the pixel height or width may not be the most accurate reflection of what device that is, and that's another reason why we would always recommend using the mobile app. Because the Tableau mobile app is always going to request the correct layout from server because it always knows what it is. So it bypasses that measurement and it requests the phone or the tablet layout as appropriate. And there are also some other benefits to using the mobile app as well, things like the single sign-on approach, mobile device management integration, the interactive preview, which I'll show you as well, favorites, and that type of thing. So let me actually pivot into the mobile app. And looks like I got timed out again on my phone, so bear with me. Try and pull that up here. There we go. All right, so let me go into the mobile app and start from the very beginning. So when you first launch it, you'll see that now there's really the favorites that show up on the main screen, and then I can always explore the different projects and workbooks. And then I've also got my recents that show up here at the very top. But I'm going to start in my favorites. And if you have not seen the Tableau mobile app in some time, um, like I mentioned, we're always updating it and always looking to enhance it. And we made some fairly major ones within the latest release. So let me start with this commission model here. And you'll notice that as obviously I'm scrolling, and I've even got the scroll within the viz itself, and of course I've got tooltips. Now you'll see that I've got the filters at the very top, but if I try and click on one, I'm given a notification that said that they're disabled. And the reason for this is because you may not have realized we're actually in preview mode. Now, in previous versions of the app, preview mode was nothing more than a snapshot. It was a static image that didn't allow any of that. It didn't allow the scrolling. It didn't allow the tooltip. That's something that we have enhanced. And if you want to see what that looked like before, this is it. So I can certainly zoom in on that picture, but I'm trying to hit the tooltip on the bar, and that's not working. Even the legend's not interactive. The filters are nothing more than just part of the image itself. So that interactive preview is kind of a nice capability, and what it allows for is also more visualizations to be loaded on the device itself, because it's not going to load the entire visualization. It's just going to load that initial snapshot, and then if I want to filter, I could just go live. And let's just change this commission rate, and there we go. And I can also move the you should be able to move that around. Maybe that's just a bad example, but there we go. And then the filtering takes shape. Now, something else that you may not have realized is that in previous versions of the mobile app, it didn't really handle URLs very well. So anytime you had some sort of action that would take you out to a web page, or even to drill over to another workbook or something like that, that would default to taking you to the browser on your phone. And here within the new version of the app, I can say go live, click on a bar, and then I see I've got my link to a different worksheet, and it carries through still within the app. So it's very app centric. All right, so now let's go back into the presentation, and let's talk about optimal design for mobile devices. So let's start with, we'll talk about really three components of this section. Really what the mobile scenario is, designing for mobile and what the best practices are, and then we'll end with some device designer tips. So what is the mobile scenario? Well, again, let's go back to our spacecraft here. And obviously there's a ton of information at once. It's dynamic, it's interactive, it's consolidated into these four panels, if you will. And let's take a look at another example. And this obviously is certainly technology that was older, but the interaction is going to be a little bit different, right? First and foremost, if you're looking at the keypad here, if you were to type in your phone number into this keypad right here, well, first off, you notice the grates in between the different keys, and it may be a little bit hard to tell in the image, but the buttons themselves are concave. And the idea is that the rounded buttons instead of flat, and the grates actually prevent you from making errors, right? Your finger won't slip. You're trying to hit the 3 versus the 4, right? So your actions will be very precise. The other component here is that you notice that the person's actually not using it with their fingers. They're actually using this this stick, if you will, to make those interactions between within the buttons. And so the takeaway here is imagine trying to type out maybe your phone number, right, on your phone versus this process here, right? On your phone, it would probably take you a second or two. Here, it'd probably take you about 3 or 4, maybe 5 seconds to punch that out. And so the takeaway is that the actions within this type of actions are expensive here, if you will, and they vary in cost of time and effort from one device to another, one format to another. And so it's easy to add more and more onto a desktop application or a dashboard, but obviously within a mobile device, specifically a phone, there are a lot of trade-offs. And you have to think about the mobile user experience, right? They're not going to just be using this in a vacuum. It's not just about how it looks. It's more importantly about how it functions, right? There are things that we have to contend with. We have offline access needs. Our input options are fingers and thumbs instead of mouse and keyboard. We have that small amount of real estate, and we probably haven't noticed, but our threshold for waiting is significantly decreased, right? If you see a website kind of spinning on your laptop, you got a good 6-7 seconds before your blood starts to boil, but on a phone that's significantly lower. And of course, the need for more concise information and high-level takeaways. And a good example that I use, that I like to bring up is your banking application. Right, so if you have I actually bank with Chase, and if I were to log into chase.com on my browser, on my laptop, there's a lot that I can do, right? I can transfer funds, I can pay bills, I can see my routing numbers and account numbers. I can actually change my contact information, like my address. I can open a new account. On the phone app, I can do some of that. I can transfer funds, I can pay bills, but I can't go in and create a new account. I can't change my contact information. And that's by design, right? Because those additional actions are not things that I need to do regularly, and it's not as important for me to do them immediately. And so the goal really shouldn't be to take the full-on desktop application and replicate it inside of a mobile app. The goal should be to pare down to focus only on the key functions that the user needs and make those functions very quick and very easily accessible. And so ultimately those key differences between mobile, like we've talked about, it's obvious that the screen size is different, but the touch interaction is going to be critical. The lack of connectivity sometimes. We've all heard stories about our carriers not being up to snuff. The user context, right? Where they are when they're using this app. Are they walking through the airport? Are they in a coffee shop? Are they in a car for some reason? Or depending upon what their day-to-day life is like, should be taken into account. And then, of course, the user expectation as well around what their patience time is for rendering. So as we kind of get into these one by one, let's start with designing for touch. All right, we see here an example dashboard that has it actually shows earthquakes. And let's say that I was curious about this particular one right here. Well, what's the likelihood that I could be exactly precise enough to hit that particular bubble with my finger or my thumb versus a mouse, right? And that's even one of the larger ones. If you're really curious about something smaller, that'd be virtually impossible. And so one of the key takeaways here is that you want to make sure that the pixel size of the touch points are large enough. Usually around 30 to 40 pixels is going to be ideal. And of course, there's a trade-off of not making it too big, since the real estate on the screen is at a premium. But so if you look at this particular dashboard on the left, what's the likelihood that I could actually hit the events green mark within the tree map without accidentally hitting one of the other two? So you kind of want to redesign that so it might be a little bit easier to do in either this screenshot here or this one over here. And then the same thing, and I'll actually show you a live example of this. Let me pull this one back up. Okay. But while I'm pulling that up here, this is a Tableau public visualization that's actually showing the home run chase and all the hitters that have actually gone after Babe Ruth and subsequently Roger Maris's home run record. And what you see here, pull this up in both the browser and the desktop. Go back to where are my favorites? Here we go. As I pull this up on my desktop, imagine trying to zero in on maybe Alex Rodriguez right here in game 155. Right? The idea that I could be that precise on my phone without accidentally hitting, maybe Roger Maris or one of the others, or somewhere where they're a little bit more condensed, it's virtually impossible. And so a better approach might be to incorporate that layout, and more importantly, the selection, where I could say, look, let me select Alex Rodriguez, and it will highlight down below. So that's going to be a more user-friendly approach on the mobile device. And subsequently, when you get into layouts and scrolling, again, scrolling on a phone is pretty much a given. It's assumed. Scrolling within a desktop or web dashboard, not ideal unless we're trying to tell that story, but certainly you want to just take that into account. But the best practice would be to do something like this, where you're actually putting the filters at the top, then the subsequent visualizations, and then when it comes to scrolling, you can really give that user a hint or that visual cue to say, look, there's a cutoff here. This viz happens to be cut off, which is why you'd want to scroll to get the rest of it, or to see that there are subsequent visualizations underneath that. And then here we've got really a very nice example of a dashboard that exists on a desktop layout, and it has two individual visualizations. One is the incident types, and the second one is the customers. Looks like this customer one probably has a good couple hundred to maybe 1,000 elements within it. But the fact that this is all one page really gives the user a nice, clean look and feel. The challenge, if you were to take this exactly as is and try to port it over to the mobile device, is now we have competing scrolling zones. Right? We have the incidents and we still have the customers, in addition to just the natural scrolling that's going to take place on the phone. So you want to try and be conscious of that and limit those competing zones. And if you have to, you can minimize that usage of the scrolling sheets by putting them at the bottom. So at least at that point, they're at the very bottom of the dashboard, and the scrolling within the device is done. That also brings us to maps, and of course, it's very common, just in the nature of how they're being used, to pan or zoom within maps, so you're essentially scrolling there as well. And so a couple different ways you can overcome that would be, or overcome the competing scroll zones. One would be to put the maps at the very bottom, and again, that's so that the user understands that there's nothing more underneath. There's no reason to scroll unless you're going to scroll specifically within the map. And then the second one would be to disable the panning and zooming within the map options of the dashboard. Now, when it comes to filters, let's go back to this example here, right? So filters are very great, they're very powerful, but there are two things to be aware of when it comes to how they operate on mobile devices, and they really come down to speed and space, right? Because you've got to load them, which means that there's a query hit. So if you're trying to pull up a list of 100 customers, well, that's a query to the database or to the extract to render that list of 100. So that could contribute to any sort of speed or performance issues. And the second one would be the space, right? Again, if we have a long list of radio button options or checkbox options, that's taking up precious real estate on the screen. And so you kind of want to be conscious of that as you make the shift from a desktop or default view to a mobile view. And a better approach would be to incorporate the filtering into the visualizations themselves, so that instead of having just another full separate area for filtering, you could actually allow that navigation of that drill path from one visualization to another. And we do recommend that you put your filters at the top and limit them to about 2 to 4, and then allow the drill down to happen down below. So here we're seeing a good example of that, where we'd be using the buttons at the very top in that visualization to render or limit the amount of marks in the map and the subsequent calendar. The other key thing, again, from a performance standpoint, is using marks as filters means you only tap the button once. But a quick filter, it's usually 2 to 3 taps where you click in it to magnify it, make your selections, and then, of course, apply. So you're actually making the user work a little bit more if in that format. So that's another example of how you want to think through the form and function for your end users. And finally, we'll just get into some key device designer best practices. The first is that, and I think you saw this in the demonstration, where there's the checkbox for the Tableau mobile app. All that does is it incorporates whether or not you're going to need the navigation menu to be allocated in terms of the space. Again, we always recommend that you use that, but it's just a nice way to incorporate that in terms, so that you're not ignoring that and building the dashboard bigger than it should be. Just to hammer the point home, you always want to create all 3 layouts and use the default dashboard really as the staging area, and also to define the structure and the intent of the dashboard, but let the individual layouts be tailored based on the ultimate need. And then, of course, again, you're not designing for specific device types, so you want to design for the range. So in this case, you may want to fit the specific width, but have the height be a little bit allow for an overhang, and certainly keep the models generic. At the moment, there is only one orientation per device layout. That's something that we're looking into, but you want to talk to your users to find out on a case-by-case basis in terms of the dashboards what they're looking to do with each of the different views, and optimize it so that they're getting their needs met. And then, just like anything else, you want to test it out. There are a number of different ways you can go about this. I will say that the device designer is not an emulator. It's not designed to do that. But you have emulators that are publicly available that are probably going to give you a little bit more of a natural feel, because obviously the device designer does still live within Tableau Desktop, which means that you're still inputting through mouse and keyboard, where to test out you really want to have the true form factor that you're going to have as a user. There are also browser tools, and of course you could use that responsive design like we talked about, just by shrinking down the browser size. And then we actually have a preview of device layouts that we've incorporated in, I want to say it was in 2019.1, but that's available for every dashboard that gets published up into Tableau Server or Tableau Online. So just to wrap up, I'd say, as far as resources that are available, the first place that I would always start would actually be either the Tableau YouTube channel, or I usually go to our most recent conference, which in this case was Tableau, or TC18. And you can always go to tc18.tableau.com, go under Learn Sessions, and I just pared the list of sessions down to mobile. And these are 6 that I think were really helpful. A lot of what we've covered in this session today was from this one, bringing dashboards mobile with Device Designer, and then of course the your journey to amazing mobile dashboards. But there's so much more that we haven't talked about, things like mobile device management, creating custom applications, single sign-on, and those are available in some of these other sessions around deploy and enjoy, and then the mobile app bootstrap. And then we also have documentation that's available, as well as the deployment guide, and that's just available from the Tableau server. It's actually in Tableau server and Tableau desktop. They have a reference to the Tableau mobile documentation, and then of course the deployment guide. And lastly, before we get to the Q&A panel, I'd say that as far as next steps, certainly talk with us on your account team. We're happy to answer any questions, talk about what your mobile needs may be, and you can certainly test it out for yourself. If you have access to Tableau server or Tableau online, your starting point could even just be take your mobile device, try to go there even in the browser, and you'll see that it's been optimized for touch, so that your quick filters expand to provide that that usability, and that would be a good place to start, and then we can always design specifically later on. And lastly, before we open it up for the Q&A panel, I just want to remind you that next month, Tuesday, September 10th, we'll be doing another Tableau Tuesday session on Show Me What's Not in Show Me. And with that, we'll look into the Q&A.
Yeah, Rob, I think I got all the questions answered in the Q&A panel so far. So if anybody else has anything. Kay just asked, is there a way to create subfolders on the Tableau server? Yes, we do. Rob, when did we start supporting like sub-projects in Tableau server?
That's a good question. Let me pull that up here. I think it was my go-to for questions like that is tableau.com fast-pace-innovation. And then what that does is it gives you kind of a microsite for every subsequent release.
Yeah. One of our attendees just said 10.5.
There we go.
They beat us to it.
Yeah. Perfect.
I like crowdsourcing these questions. This is good.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I'm just curious. Was it 10.5? No.
So it doesn't look like any other questions are rolling in. So I think we're all set there.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone again, and we look forward to seeing you next month on September 10th. Have a good day.